On the clear morning of September 23, 1846, General Zachary Taylor rallies his troops into the streets of Monterrey for a third day of bitter combat. For 2 days, Americans have fiercely assaulted the city and seized its outer fortifications, yet its defenders refuse to yield. As the American columns advance, Mexican soldiers and desperate civilians brace for another storm of steel. To hold their city, the Mexicans have forced the Americans into close-quarters urban warfare, terrain their foe scarcely knows. If Taylor and his army of occupation can seize Monterrey, it will deal a crushing blow to Mexico's already faltering war effort. May 11, 1846. General Zachary Taylor has decisively forced the Mexicans out of Texas in just 2 battles. Despite his victories, the Rio Grande still stands between Taylor and the Mexican Army of the North. General Arista determines he has too few soldiers to defend Matamoros and disembarks with what is left of his Army of the North on May 17th. Taylor waits a day for Arista and crosses the Rio Grande on May 18th. Matamoros is now firmly in American hands. Arista marches his army towards Linares. His army, desperately low on morale, trudges southward for 11 days. Many of his soldiers desert along the way. When they reach Linares, just 2,638 soldiers remain in the Mexican army. Conversely, the Army of Occupation is flooded with volunteers. But this brings different problems. The newly arrived volunteers care little for discipline, and many contract dysentery, malaria, and yellow fever. While Taylor plans his next move, President Paredes faces growing pressure in Mexico City. His attempts to mobilize his army have proven futile, and discontent grows throughout the Mexican capital. He now sees military success as the only way to secure his grip on power. Paredes decides he must form the Army of the North himself in San Luis Potosi. He leaves Mexico City in control of his vice president, Nicolas Bravo. President Mariano Paredes relieves Arista of command as soon as he reaches Linares. For his replacement, Paredes appoints General Pedro de Ampudia to command the Mexican Army of the North. Ampudia, a brave but quick-tempered general, moves his army to Monterrey. The 41-year-old general, motivated by the potential glory of a successful defense, decides to meet the Americans at Monterrey. The Polk administration also plans an expedition against the city of Chihuahua, the closest major Mexican settlement to Santa Fe. In mid-July, General Wool and his Illinois regiments sailed down the Mississippi and across the Gulf of Mexico. They then ride overland to San Antonio and rendezvous with his horsemen on September 4th. Wool puts his recruits through strenuous training for about a month and waits for adequate supplies before he advances. As July draws to a close, the Paredes regime plummets in popularity. The Mexican-American War has added to Mexico's instability, and many of its states seek greater autonomy. On July 28th, Federalist leaders and army officers rebel against the central government and take control of the city. Paredes, outside the capital and with little support, is forced to resign the presidency. A few days later, José Mariano Salas, a Federalist leader, becomes the new president of Mexico. U.S. Secretary of War William L. Marcy recommends that Monterrey, the stronghold of northern Mexico, be taken by Taylor. The American army disembarks from Matamoros on July 6th. Taylor decides to march some of his army overland and have some takes steamers up the Rio Grande. The Americans reached the disheveled city of Camargo on August 8th. Taylor now decides to move inland and marches his army towards Cerralvo. On September 13th, the last of the Americans arrive at Cerralvo. In total, Taylor now commands 6,640 soldiers, poised to take the stronghold of Monterrey. Taylor sets out from Cerralvo, marching his army as one towards Monterrey. While the American army moves in full force on Monterrey, President Polk devises other plans to bring the war to a swift end. But Paredes is now unwilling to negotiate. Polk thinks a possible solution to his problem lies in Havana, Cuba. Antonio López de Santa Anna, the once influential general, had been exiled to Cuba 2 years prior, after he was forced from power. Polk offers to allow Santa Anna through the blockade of Veracruz if he agrees to gain influence in Mexico to sell Mexico's northern territories for a fair price. Santa Anna agrees. In late August, he arrives in Veracruz and is greeted by supporters and troops. When Santa Anna arrives in Mexico City, President Salas appoints him commander-in-chief of the Mexican army. But instead of trying to make peace, Santa Anna puts all of his energy into raising the Mexican army of the North to repel the Americans. On the morning of September 19th, General Taylor and his advance guard arrive on the plain before Monterrey. The Mexican artillery greet the Americans with a few warning shots. Striking near Taylor, Taylor encamps his army of occupation at a safe distance and begins a reconnaissance of the impressive Mexican fortifications. General Ampudia, the commander of the Army of the North, has had months to prepare his city. The Mexicans have fortifications sprinkled throughout the city. La Teneria, recently reconstructed after Ampudia dismantled it a few weeks before. Fort Diablo, protecting access from the east of the city. La Purisma Bridge, guarding the crossing of the Santa Lucia stream. The Citadel, a fort built around an abandoned church. It dominates the flat landscape around it. Fort Libertad, a small redoubt on Independence Hill. Bishop's Palace, a crescent-shaped artillery position also on top of Independence Hill. Fort Federacion, a small redoubt across the Santa Catarina River. Fort El Soldado, an artillery position on top of Federacion Hill. General Ampudia, after receiving reinforcements and merging with the garrison of Monterrey, now has 7,300 men under his command. Ampudia stations most of his regulars in his fortifications, outside of the city. The remaining regulars, irregulars, and auxiliaries are housed inside the city, ready to take positions on rooftops. He stations his cavalry on the outskirts of Monterrey to act as a mobile reserve to assist either side of the battle. General Taylor and his advisors vigorously search for weaknesses in the Mexican defense. By the evening of September 19th, Old Rough and Ready has his plan. Taylor calls for a two-pronged attack on the key to Mexico. For the first, he orders Brigadier General William Worth to assault the west side of Monterrey with a giant hook movement. Then, Worth is ordered to capture the fortifications on Independence and Federation Hill, giving the Americans control of the Saltillo Road, the last artery of support for Monterrey. To distract the Mexicans from Worth, the remainder of the Army of Occupation will assault the fortifications on the northeast side of the city, with the goal of drawing Mexican soldiers away from the west side of the city. At 2:00 p.m. on September 20th, Worth and his 2,000 soldiers begin their march towards the western side of the city. The Americans turn south and march towards the Saltillo road. General Worth, escorted by some Texas Rangers, rides in front of his division. As the Americans continue their advance, the Mexicans on Independence Hill creep down its southern side and move to ambush Worth. Unseen by the Texas Rangers, the Mexicans slip into the cornfields at the base of the hill. General Worth and his escort drift far ahead of the main American body. As they ride closer, cannons bombard Worth's guard from the top of the hill. The concealed Mexicans charge towards Worth and his Texans. For a moment, the Americans are caught in the open. Moments later, the main force reinforces Worth and his escort, and they withdraw, for now. As the Americans retreat, the day draws to a close. Worth orders his division to bivouac a safe distance from the Mexican position. That night, General Worth writes to General Taylor, asking him to form a diversion and feint an attack on the northeast fortifications. On the morning of September 21st, General Taylor stations parts of his division on the prairie northeast of Monterrey. However, its leader, General David Twiggs, is absent from command due to illness. Without hesitation, Taylor names Lieutenant Colonel John Garland acting commander of Twiggs' division. Once his soldiers form up, Garland orders his men to march. Almost immediately, Mexican artillery bombards the regulars. Taking harsh fire, the Americans remain disciplined and carry forward. As Garland's division approaches, the Teneria erupts with cannon and musket fire. The rest of the Mexican fortifications bombard the advancing Americans, leaving them little room for cover. The regulars, met with death and destruction on every side, struggle to maintain formation. Under harrowing fire, a small group of soldiers dislodge a contingent of Mexicans guarding a distillery. The U.S. 3rd attempts to march further into the city, but they are attacked by many Mexicans firing from rooftops, a scenario Garland's men are not prepared for. The Americans are urged forward by the bravery of their officers. Many of them are slaughtered as they struggle to gain ground. General Taylor orders the 3rd Artillery Company, led by Captain Braxton Bragg, to support the struggling regulars. Garland orders Bragg to fire at an entrenched Mexican battery blocking the road, but American artillery is rendered ineffective in the narrow streets of Monterrey, and Bragg is forced back. Seeing many of his best officers killed, captured, or wounded, Garland orders the 1st Division to retreat. The Mexican soldiers in the Teneria were astonished to see the Americans retreat, as they were on the brink of losing the redoubt. Viewing from afar, Taylor decides to reinforce Garland with 1,400 soldiers to assault the Teneria, led by Brigadier General John A. Quitman. In addition, he sends Brigadier General William Butler with 600 soldiers to attack the city at a more central location. When the volunteers form up, 3 companies of the 4th Infantry, including a young Ulysses S. Grant, who were separated from the first assault, marched on Monterrey to make sure they didn't avoid the fight. Not long after, the volunteers under General Quitman and General Hamer advanced towards the city. As they cross the prairie, they step over their fallen comrades. Many are grievously mangled by the Mexican artillery. As the American 4th nears the Teneria, they take a harrowing barrage, forcing the remainder of the 4th to hide in a nearby cornfield. As the remainder of the 4th is being slaughtered, General Quitman's brigade nears the fort. Quitman orders his soldiers to assault the fort head-on. As they move forward, they face heavy resistance from the nearly exhausted Mexicans. The American volunteers are forced to stop their advance and take shelter near the Teneria. As the Americans question how to get out of their precarious position, the Teneria stops returning fire to deal with a new threat. Captain Electus Bacchus and a small band of regulars manage to get on top of a roof near the Teneria and begin firing at the exhausted Mexican artillerymen. Sensing a great opportunity, Colonel Jefferson Davis cries out to his Mississippians and orders them to charge the fort. The other Tennesseans around the fort follow suit. As the Americans fly over the walls of the Teneria, the tired and thirsty Mexican soldiers flee. While the Americans took their first costly objective of the day, General Butler leads his Ohioans to enter the middle of the city. Butler hopes the Mexicans will not focus on his area of attack, but as they near the city, a barrage of bullets and grape shot welcomes the advancing Americans. Many Ohioans take cover behind hedges to avoid the incoming fire, but they are struck down all the same. General Butler confers with General Taylor and recommends a retreat to the suburbs of Monterrey, which Taylor approves. At the same time, Colonel Jefferson Davis, emboldened by his capture of the Teneria, gathers a party of men to attack Fort Diablo. They cross the stream and close in on the fort. The fort itself could not shoot Davis and his men, but Mexican soldiers, perched on nearby rooftops, have a clear shot. Davis and his men are forced to retreat. But just as Taylor orders his retreat, he hears of the capture of the Teneria. Sensing his soldiers' momentum, he orders General Butler to assault Fort Diablo. He also orders Garland to round up his men and aid in the assault on Fort Diablo. The exhausted Ohioans again prepare to join in on Fort Diablo. General Butler spearheads a charge toward the Mexicans. Butler is wounded badly in the leg and pulled out of battle. However, as his men struggle forward, the Mexicans fall back. As the Ohioans finally catch their breath, General Maya, commanding at La Purisma Bridge, aims his batteries at the recovering Americans. The cannon shots blast holes through Butler's lines. General Butler and Hamer reason that it is insanity to continue towards Fort Diablo and retreat their volunteers. As the Ohioans fall back, Garland and his regulars return to the now bloody streets of Monterrey. Garland orders what's left of his force to charge La Purisma Bridge. As the Americans rush forward, the soldiers, running headfirst into incoming fire, become congested and confused on the bridge. The Mexicans have little issue mowing down Garland's men for the next few minutes. As the bodies begin to pile up, Garland withdraws his troops to the only safe spot, the Teneria. The Ohioan and Mississippian volunteers attempt to withdraw to the American camp. They think the day's fighting is at an end. They are wrong. General Ampudia seeks to hit the Americans at their weakest. General Jose Garcia flies out of the citadel with his 3rd and 7th Cavalry. Their first victims are the straggling American volunteers, who make easy targets for the Mexican lancers. Knowing they are the Mexicans' next targets, many American volunteers begin to panic. As they near their breaking point, Colonel Albert Sidney Johnston steps up and rallies the frantic Americans into a line. As the lancers near the line, the retreating soldiers let out a fiercely accurate volley, repulsing the lancers for the day. After 8 hours of fighting, the Americans exhaustedly stumble into camp. What had started as a diversionary attack had piled into a full-fledged attack into the jaws of the Mexican defenses. That same morning, on the other side of town, General Worth and his division form up and begin to march towards the Saltillo road. After marching a mile and a half, the Americans gain sight of 1,500 Mexican cavalry and infantry ready to defend their city. The Americans halt their march and form a battle line. For a few moments, the Americans and Mexicans tensely stare each other down. Both sides launch sporadic volleys from 200 yards away. After much anticipation, Colonel Juan Nájera leads his cavalry towards Duncan's artillery. However, his infantry, which should have offered support, refrained from engaging the Americans. As Nájera nears the American line, Major Ben McCulloch charges his Texan Company A directly into the oncoming Mexicans. Outnumbered 10-1, McCulloch and his cavalry use their new Colt revolvers to efficiently disperse the Mexican lancers. While McCulloch shocks the Mexicans, the Americans pick off Mexican stragglers. Colonel Nájera bravely urges his men on against the Texans until he himself is killed. Seeing their beloved leader fall, the Lancers fall back to friendly territory. Worth's next objective is Bishop's Palace. However, the Americans are soon bombarded by a battery of 2 cannons on Federation Hill, which the Americans did not know about until now. General Worth decides to march his men double-time to the Saltillo road. While in transit, Worth's division is met with a torrent of cannon and musket fire from the Mexican earthworks. His men finally reach the Saltillo road and move to a position out of range of the Mexican batteries. General Worth sets his sights on the batteries on top of the 400-foot-tall Federation Hill. He sends Captain Charles Smith with 3 companies of his artillery battalion to assault the hundreds of Mexican soldiers on top of Federation Hill. Captain Smith smuggles his men through cornfields until they reach Rio Santa Catarina. Cannon shots rain down and boil the water around the Americans as they ford the river. As the Americans prepare to climb Federation Hill, the Mexicans position themselves to fire on the attackers. Observing the movement on top of the hill, Worth orders Captain Dixon Miles to take 7 companies and draw the defenders' attention. Smith's soldiers begin their ascent while Miles sends some of his men to draw fire. As the Americans near the summit, they face destructive volleys from the Mexicans. However, the Americans fearlessly brandish their bayonets and charge over the top, forcing the Mexicans out of Fort Federacion. The Americans take a cannon from Fort Federacion and unleash it on El Soldado. Smith's men now bombard El Soldado, and at the same time, the support troops summit the hill. Smith's and Miles' soldiers all rush El Soldado. They take a horrifying cannon shot, but continue sprinting at the fort, unfazed. The disturbed Mexicans flee down the hill, leaving it completely in American hands. General Worth eagerly plans his next assault, this time on Independence Hill, the last defense of the west of Monterrey. He sends 470 soldiers under Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Childs to attack Independence Hill the next morning. At 3 a.m., Worth's division begin their assault on the west side of Independence Hill. The Mexicans expect the Americans to move up the east side of the hill, leaving the west side less fortified. American regulars with Texas Rangers begin their ascent of the 700-foot-high Independence Hill. Once the Americans are 100 feet away, the Mexicans begin firing through the misty darkness. After Childs reaches the top of the hill, he cries, "Now, men, give them hell!" Childs' force draws their swords and rush the redoubt. The Mexicans break and run east to Bishop's Palace. After catching their breath, Lieutenant James Longstreet leads his company towards the retreating Mexicans. They exchange sallies while both sides retreat to their positions. Seeing the challenge of taking Bishop's Palace, Worth orders a 12-pound howitzer to be carried to the summit of Independence Hill to hit the palace. Once it's dragged to the top of the hill, the howitzer rains fire on the palace. However, the Mexicans are not at all defeated. The Americans form a plan to draw the Mexicans out of their fortress. Lieutenant Colonel Berra is determined to regain full control of the hill. The Americans send about 90 soldiers to engage his force, while the rest of them discreetly flank the Mexicans on both sides of the hill. Seeing this, Berra orders his garrison to charge. The small American force slowly falls back into line. When the cavalry nears, Worth's hidden men give the signal. Infantrymen rise on the right and left of the Mexicans, seemingly out of nowhere. In shock, the Mexican cavalry bunches up, and the entire Mexican force flees to western Monterrey. American infantry floods into Bishop's Palace. They have taken every Mexican earthwork on the west side of Monterrey and have complete control of the Saltillo road. For now, General Worth is victorious. Monterrey is cut off. While General Worth is taking Bishop's Palace, General Taylor solidifies his hold on La Teneria. He orders his soldiers to recover from the prior day's fighting. But what lies ahead of them will be just as challenging. As the sun rises on September 23rd, General Worth decides to send most of his division to attack western Monterrey. General Worth forms another two-pronged attack. He sends the first column to advance along the Santa Catarina River. The second column will attack northeastern Monterrey. Worth's division advances through the city, facing little resistance, until they reach Plaza del Carne. As they advance on the square, Mexican soldiers attack from the surrounding rooftops and open fire. As the Americans move to attack Monterrey from the west, Taylor orders his recovered soldiers into the jaws of Monterrey. However, when they advance on Fort Diablo, they find it unmanned. General Ampudia withdrew his soldiers further into the city the prior night. Astonished, General Quitman sends Colonel Jefferson Davis to occupy the vacant fort. General Taylor, now hearing of the abandonment of Fort Diablo, orders General Quitman to advance toward the heart of the city. Although the Mexicans retreated from Fort Diablo, they are far from defeated. Their main advantage, expertise in city warfare, weighs heavy on them. To combat this advantage, General Quitman calls for Texan reinforcements, who have fought the Mexicans in urban warfare many times prior to the war. The Texans lead the Americans into the third day of battle in Monterrey. As they go forward, Mirabeau Lamar, former president of the Republic of Texas, cries out, "Remember Goliad! Remember the Alamo!" Slowly but surely, the Americans break into the houses of Monterrey. After they gain access to the buildings, they climb onto the rooftops and rain fire on the Mexican defenders. With their newly improved tactics, the Americans, led by the Texas Rangers, begin methodically clearing Mexican defenders from the rooftops of Monterrey. As the Americans slowly advance around the redoubt, Captain Braxton Bragg moves his artillery to support their advance. His battery begins firing on the Mexican position, but they are battered by the entrenched Mexicans. However, Bragg continues his attack, drawing their focus away from the advancing American regulars. Colonel Jefferson Davis nears the cathedral at the heart of the city. He requests artillery aid from Taylor, but to Davis's shock, Taylor ordered all of his soldiers assaulting the city to retreat. At the western side of Monterrey, the Americans also adapt the Texan approach to the city. The experienced Texans also gradually advance while clearing the rooftops of Mexican soldiers and slowly move towards the Plaza del Carne. The column marching along the river had a slightly easier route towards the plaza, as the Mexicans placed their primary focus on the first column. The second column uses the same rooftop tactics and inches closer to the plaza. The Mexicans offer stiff resistance to the advancing Americans, but slowly and deliberately, they are cut down. Finally, the Americans push into the Plaza del Carne, and the Mexican soldiers withdraw further into the city. Worth's division pushes further into the city throughout the rest of the day and nears the Grand Plaza by nightfall. As the Americans experience some hard-fought success, Ampudia's position has become fragile. His soldiers, although willing to put up a fierce fight, are extremely fatigued after 3 days of battle. On top of that, the entire city of Monterrey is now encircled by American forces. With the harsh reality of the situation bearing down on him, General Ampudia requests a parley with General Taylor before battle starts on the 24th. Throughout the day, the two generals come to terms for the surrender of Monterrey. General Taylor offers generous terms to the Mexicans, as he is aware of his own tenuous position. What remains of the Mexican army is forced to march south to a negotiated line past the Rinconada Pass. In addition, the two sides agree to a ceasefire for the next 8 weeks. While the Mexicans had staged a valiant defense, the city now lies in American hands. However, they paid dearly for it. The Battle of Monterrey cost both sides nearly 500 casualties. When Polk hears of the generous terms Taylor gave Ampudia, he is outraged. He believes that the Mexicans will simply regroup and fight the Americans again. Immediately, he orders General Taylor to cancel the armistice. By mid-October, General Ampudia reaches San Luis Potosi. Upon arrival, he is relieved of command by Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Many in Mexico believe he is the only man who can stop the Americans after the embarrassing defeats of Arista and Ampudia. Hey, history buffs! If you love our detailed coverage of history here on Uncovered, consider supporting the channel on Patreon. As a patron, you'll be helping us cover the real costs of research, production, and storytelling. If you would like to see more frequent, detailed, high-quality history videos, head over to patreon.com/uncovered exclusive and help keep history uncovered.